Hey there, guys. This is Cole. Welcome back to another movie review. Today's movie I'm gonna remember how I said eventually at some point I'd like to cover some Scooby-Doo movies? Well, I'm not gonna get all of it done right away because there's a whole bunch of them, but I figured I'm going to at least review one of them. I'm thinking maybe one. If I'm gonna do this review series, which I will, it'll probably only be one of the movies in the franchise that I'm gonna review like maybe once every week apart, maybe. But so this might take me some time to do, but um, as long as I get it done, that's what matters. But today's movie I'm reviewing is the 1987 direct-to-video movie Scooby-Doo and the Reluctant Werewolf from 1987, and this was the first official direct-to-video movie. Now, I know before this there was technically somewhat of a short movie which I don't even really qualify as a movie, which is Scooby-Doo Goes to Hollywood from 1979, but like that movie is only 49 minutes, so I wouldn't even really credit that as a full-length feature movie. But this, on the other hand, I can classify because it's an hour and 30 minutes. So I just decided to start here instead. And this is a movie that I have always liked. And, now at the time that this movie came out, Scooby-Doo was, of course, a well-known established IP. I mean, in terms of the classic Scooby-Doo, I think everyone would agree in terms of the old school classic stuff that like the original TV series Scooby-Doo Where Are You, which lasted from 1969 to 1970, was the best iteration. But then afterward, and because of how successful that show was in 1976, because of how popular Scooby-Doo Where Are You was, the TV show basically had a revival with a sequel TV series called The Scooby-Doo Show, and the ratings for that were pretty good. And then there was the Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo show, which, despite getting a mixed reception, it did do well enough to continue. And then this movie was basically a tie-in to it. And this movie, when it came out, it got mixed to positive reviews from critics. It got decently positive. I mean, the reviews were okay, but over time, this movie has gained a cult following and become a fan favorite Scooby-Doo movie. But I personally always really liked this one. But anyways, what is the plot of this movie? Well, the plot of this movie is as follows. The plot follows Scooby, Scrappy-Doo, Shaggy, and Shaggy's girlfriend Googie as they navigate the dangerous Monster Rally race, with Shaggy transforming into a werewolf and needing to win the race to reverse the curse. So that's basically the premise to this movie. So it's a rather simple, straightforward premise, and let's just get into the review. This isn't going to be too long of a review, but so the movie starts off where we're introduced to Shaggy, of course, Shaggy and Scrappy-Doo, Scooby-Doo and Shaggy, where where early on in the movie, Scooby-Doo and Shaggy are basically on the couch, eating popcorn and watching a scary movie, and Scooby-Doo gets scared, spilling the popcorn all over the place, and, Shaggy's not happy about it. And then eventually he calms down, so then he decides to go to bed, and early on in the movie, we're introduced to our main villain of the movie, Dracula, of course, the well-known iconic vampire, who basically wants to, because what happened was, early on, like right at the beginning of the movie, Shaggy and Scooby were in a race and they won the race, but Dracula's werewolf decided to permanently quit. So because of that, Dracula decides to get henchmen to basically turn Shaggy into a werewolf to basically be a part of the race. And yeah, so that's basically the main gist of the movie. And one thing I will say is that I do think this movie does have some good comedy. Like, there's a part early on in the movie where where Scrappy-Doo, which is Scooby-Doo's cousin, basically says to him, he basically says, that scary movie was something, wasn't it? And then Scooby's like, yeah. And then I like the part where he's like, do you remember when he opened his big scary mouth? And then Scooby gets scared and then he runs out the room, jumping on top of Shaggy, like really upsetting him, And then during that night, Scooby-Doo notices that these bad guys, these two henchmen that Dracula decided to bring over to the place to try to transform Shaggy into a werewolf. Basically, their plan is to cut a hole in the ceiling of Shaggy's house, basically, so the moonlight will reflect on him, turning Shaggy into a werewolf, but Scooby-Doo puts a stop to that by dragging Shaggy out, and he's about to show Shaggy the hole in the roof, and Scrappy as well, but by the time he goes to the room, it's already fixed, because the bad guys basically put the hole back that they cut out back on top. That way, when Shaggy looked at it, it didn't look that way. And Shaggy was upset, obviously, that he was woken up. And then Scrappy says to him, we love you, Scoob, even if you are a bit of a pain, And not long after that, the next night, however, the plan does successfully work. And Shaggy is transformed into a werewolf. And basically, Dracula manages to kidnap Scooby-Doo, Scrappy-Doo, Googie, Shaggy's new girlfriend, and of course, Scooby-Doo, Shaggy, Googie, and Scrappy-Doo. He manages to successfully kidnap them when his two henchmen basically, carry them away in a helicopter. And like, here's the thing, like, Dracula basically promises Shaggy, you will become a human again. The only way you can become a human is if you decide to race. Basically, Shaggy basically has to win. He basically has to win the race in order to turn back into a human. If he loses the race, he's permanently a werewolf forever. So obviously, he doesn't want that to happen. And throughout the course of the movie, Dracula decides that even though that's what he promises him, he personally does not want Shaggy to win the race because, like I said, his werewolf, the guy who was a part of Dracula's castle, the werewolf, basically decided to quit. And so he wants Shaggy as the permanent one. So Dracula tries to do everything in his power to rig the race. That way Shaggy won't win. That's basically his plan. And even during, the night when they're staying in the castle, like they want to escape. Like, there's a scene where Googie, Shaggy's new girlfriend, has a bunch of scarves tied around as a rope, and Scooby and Shaggy are trying to climb out of the castle to escape. However, a crocodile nearly eats Scooby-Doo, but he's able to escape with that not happening. And then Shaggy sees there's a crocodile, so then they all crawl up, realizing that there's really, there's no escaping this castle. You have to win the race. And overall, I thought that this was a pretty good movie. It's a rather simple plot, and I do really like the scene. And one thing I do really like about this movie, I really wish that we would have seen this character in other Scooby-Doo stuff, but I really like Googie, which is Shaggy's new girlfriend. Like, I really like Googie as a character. She is by far one of the best Scooby-Doo characters, in my opinion. Like, the fact that we did not even get to see her, the fact that we didn't get to see her in anything else after that is rather disappointing, because I actually do rather like her character. And basically, Googie and Scrappy-Doo basically, on the previous night before the race, they basically ask Count Dracula if they can take if they could take the race car as like a practice round to practice for the race, but Dracula says, no, it's being worked on. And then they're like, oh, can we use our car? As, the henchmen basically brought their car there. And then Dracula approves it. But they basically tried to do everything in their power to make sure that they fail at it. But, for example, I like the whole part. I really like the part when Dracula basically gets his henchmen to like lift up the bridge, and like they fall onto like a mud pit, and there's water surrounding them, and there's like a bunch of crocodiles about to eat them, but obviously it doesn't work. And then, I mean, obviously this is not realistic at all because it's a cartoon, but like I like the part when Shaggy and Scooby, they're basically using the car, and like they're using the tires to like bounce on top of the crocodile's head and then go back on the road to get away. I thought that scene was rather funny. And so throughout the whole night, basically basically Dracula's henchmen tried to keep Shaggy up all night. That way he doesn't have the energy to basically do the race. And the plan does succeed. However, it doesn't at the same time, because the next morning when Shaggy's not fully awake, Googie is able to do something to make Shaggy fully awake from the race. And Shaggy is ready for the race. And one thing I will say about this movie, I do think that the race sequences are very entertaining, where anytime that Shaggy and Scooby-Doo, whenever it seems like they're gonna run into a problem that's gonna make them lose the race, and like Dracula, that's what Dracula's trying to do. He's trying to make them lose the race so Shaggy stays a werewolf forever, but it obviously doesn't work, and like every plan that he does literally backfires. And there's even a part where Dracula says, "No more Mr. Nice Guy. Time to get out KG," which is basically they were originally going to use King Kong for the giant monster, but Hanna-Barbera was not allowed to do that because Hanna-Barbera did not have the legal rights to King Kong, so they basically had to make like a knockoff version. But I do think that the knockoff version does work for the movie, and just when it seems like the knockoff version is about to get rid of Scooby-Doo and Shaggy, Googie and Scrappy-Doo come to the rescue, and they do successfully win the race. However, Dracula says that he will never turn Shaggy back to a human, and then Shaggy's like, "Come on, you promised me that you would turn me back into a human if I won the race." But then Dracula's wife says, "This book right here says how to turn a werewolf back to a human," and then Dracula is like, "Give me that book." But of course, Scooby-Doo and Shaggy successfully manage to steal the book and basically escape from Dracula. And then they go home, and Googie is able to turn Shaggy back into a human, and the movie ends where Googie hears growling, and she thinks that Scooby-Doo turned into a werewolf, but he was like, nah, he just basically took a werewolf mask, and then he ripped it off, and then he laughs, and then Googie's like, "Oh, that's so immature, that's not funny." And then Shaggy's like, "Come on, it was a little funny," but then they have a laugh at it, and then Shaggy says, "I'm finally a human again, and that Dracula will not have the power to turn me back." And then the movie ends with a sequel bait ending where Dracula says, "That's what you think." But yeah. Anyways, at the end of the day, I thought that this was a pretty good movie. Really, my only issue with it is the cliffhanger, but other than that, Scooby-Doo and the Reluctant Werewolf is a pretty good movie, and I'm going to give this movie a 9 out of 10. So yeah. Anyways, guys, that was my review on Scooby-Doo and the Reluctant Werewolf, and we will catch you guys later. Bye-bye now.